On behalf of the AIHEC Aseto'ne Network Project, I want to welcome you to today's webinar featuring Dr. Corey Welch. My name is Daryl Monto, and I am the project coordinator for the Aseto'ne Network Project. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Welch, who will be giving the presentation titled Environmental Issues of Coal and Economic Development for the Northern Cheyenne and Other Tribal Nations. Dr. Welch is Northern Cheyenne from Montana and has his PhD in biology. He currently serves as the director for the STEM Scholars Program at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. He has previously worked with tribal colleges and tribal college students and taught classes at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. Dr. Welch also serves on the board of directors for SACNAS. And for those not familiar with SACNAS, SACNAS is the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And he is also currently the secretary-elect for the board of directors. He is committed to assisting students, especially students of color in STEM, and is a role model and strong advocate for Native students in higher education. Again, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Welch, who will now begin his presentation.
AIHEC and NIH for the funding for this. I'm going to start a little mini timer for myself just to kind of scale things a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the environmental issues facing Northern Cheyenne and coal. This is an ongoing issue. If this happened in December, is the Trump administration cut 2 million acres of land from a couple of different wildlife refuges and national monument areas. These areas are rich in coal, uranium, oil, so obviously the Navajo Nation, the Utes, the other folks in the region all are well aware of these things, and so this is going to be an ongoing issue that's going to require creative leaders across Indian country to maintain access to important sites for us culturally and also economic and other kinds of sustainability for protecting our air, water, etc., and our just general health. Even this happened 3 days ago. There's a recent increase. So this is, I'm just hitting all these points just to say this is an ongoing thing that we need more educated leaders. We need more students getting the skills to actually be in the trenches, doing the science, doing the public policy, doing the health-related research impacts, environmental impacts. So let's talk about across Indian country in general. Basically, we have a huge amount of the natural resources in this country, renewable and non-renewable. Grazing lands, commercial forests, harvesting crops, oil and gas reserves, uranium. You can see Western coal reserves, 30%, and annual trust royalty payments, of which there was a big lawsuit that just got settled within the last decade regarding the mismanagement of those kind of funds. Talking about my tribe specifically, there's about 5,000 members on the reservation itself in eastern Montana. It's about the 35th, 36th largest reservation, so it's not huge, but it's not particularly small. Rural. One boundary is the Tongue River to the east, which is an important waterway that'll be brought up a little bit later in this presentation. There's a couple other prominent water sources in the area that have coal and other related activities nearby. High unemployment rate, tribal government is primary employer. We have some light logging through the Custer National Forest that extends onto the reservation, but it's not a huge economic force. There's pressure to develop fracking. There's been a couple of fights around that, and more importantly, it's always been about coal, and I'll talk about coal. And I just always like to highlight that we do have a wonderful tribal college in Reindeer itself. Little nice tribal college. The issues around this, particularly around coal, the most recent stuff has been happening in the last 6 to 7 years that's related to the Northern Cheyenne. This is from the Huffington Post. Coal Hungry World brings tough choices for Native Americans, particularly coal towards China. And this is from 2014. 2011, the Orient Express will Montana become a coal colony. So there's billionaire folks investing in the idea that we can tap into some of this amazing coal out of the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana and serve global markets around coal. So I think I mentioned this in the previous slide, but 30% of U.S. coal reserves west of the Mississippi are located on native lands, or the pathway for the delivery of that coal is trains that will haul to a port. And the issue with just even hauling coal through your lands or train tracks, the dust actually flies out of the cart a little bit. So it's highly toxic. It leaves a fine dust along the tracks, railroad communities. It can get kicked up into the dust. It can end up in the groundwater very easily. And so there's some chronic diseases associated with that, which I won't list here, but emphysema, asthma, the CWP and COPD. These are issues of working directly with coal, but these indirect things as far as asthma, emphysema hits wider communities and is often harder to track and detect. But you'll see higher incidences of these diseases around those communities that have railroad tracks or coal mining in the area. So specifically the Northern Cheyennes and coal, give you a little bit of brief history. There's been some eco activity, which I'll talk about, the Otter Creek on the lower right. You can see a picture of the trains. You can see that open top on a coal car. So that's where just it bouncing around is going to lead to some particulates bouncing around out of the coal. So the brief history, to give you a sense, the Powder River Basin is one of the largest, if not the largest, coal area in the world. It's a huge, huge area of land. There's many mines in this area, and there's, on the lower left, is a proposed Otter Creek mine, which we'll talk a fair bit about in this presentation. I point out coal strip on the little dot on the left figure, and then you can see it on the right figure, and you see the coal strip's about 20 miles north of the Northern Cheyenne Res, and you can see that the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is completely encompassed within the Powder River Basin coal. So in fact, if you stick a shovel in the ground, you're going to hit coal on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. This is the coal-fired plants that are supported by just this region. And so you can see this is a huge U.S. Supported policy. So to develop coal in this area. And I'll talk a little bit more about about the production in that area, but for what it's worth over time. But just wanted to give you a sense that this is a nationwide, this region is supplying the nation effectively. So part of the reason the Cheyennes have never developed coal goes back to the prophecy of sweet medicine, one of our early creators and spiritual leaders. He said, "They will come looking for a certain stone. They will take without asking. These people will not listen to what you have to say, and they will kill all the animals." The Cheyennes have chosen to have a relatively pristine environment relative to what they could have done to the land around. So there's some legal fights, how they've had to fight to actually protect that. And so that's what I want to highlight here, some activities in the last 40 to 50 years that have gone. And mind you, nearly all of this funding for this for these legal fights, has been run by the Northern Cheyenne tribe. So we're not a wealthy tribe. So this is a big investment that's had broader impacts and implications for across Indian country. And it shows a value judgment of the people. So in the 1970s, the Montana Power Company and several utilities in Washington and Oregon launched to build 2 coal-fired plants at Coal Strip. And these are called plants 1 and 2. The tribe became concerned at the time because of the prevailing wind patterns and pollution that these plants might pollute the watershed. And there were in the 1970s, there were no legal standards. They weren't, the plants, the private companies were not obligated to minimize such pollution. So the tribe sought legal protection of its air quality. Initiated became that they just adopted, we're going to be the first unit of government federal, state, local, to raise our air quality standards to the most pristine level. So the air quality on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is that of a national park and wildlife wilderness areas. In 1982, in violation of trust responsibilities, the Secretary of Interior, this is a Republican administration for what it's worth, held the largest coal lease sale and public auction in the nation's history. Tracts offered basically were all around the Northern Cheyenne Res. And so faced with that reality and inability to get any change in the policy or involvement in the decision process, the tribe sued. And it was a big fight, and it took a decade. The tribe prevailed on all of its claims, and it established that all this is important impact for today is all future development in the areas adjoining the reservation must be a trust responsibility to identify and mitigate, so cut down the adverse impacts on affected tribes. And so this has been a service to beyond Montana and the Northern Cheyenne Nation. Round two was, okay, they got their butt handed to them on federal law. What if we focus on not federal lands, but can we do state and private lands? Can we go to around the federal limitations that we just lost in the court case to some state issues? And so they planned it along the Tongue River, so that's that eastern barrier of the reservation, and they got private landowners and state lands. And so basically the federal role was minimized. The state of Montana issued the permits, and these were rubber stamped by the federal authorities. Again, the tribe fought, and it took another decade, 15 plus years, to actually win that lawsuit. In the meantime, 2 more power plants were built in Colstrip, which is, again, 20 miles north. This is what Colstrip looks like today. And I just on a personal note, I'd like to acknowledge this is where my mom, all my aunts and uncles went to high school. This is where 2 of my uncles worked at this power plants for their whole careers. Their families were raised in Colstrip. My brother still works part-time or frequently in shifts down in Colstrip. So this is a place where my family's socioeconomic livelihood is based off of this area. So this is personal, but also is just kind of the realities of kind of figuring this out. So literally the town is called Colstrip. So it is a definite mining town. Give you a broader sense of the Powder River Basin and the coal production over the last 4 or 5 decades. These are in millions of tons, and it's been a slight decline in the last couple of years towards the end of the Obama administration. And that also is related to fracking and other just economic, broader global energy policies. Whether or not Trump changes or push towards making coal more viable on the global and national market remains to be seen if there'll be an increase in coal production. I guess it's probably too early to say at this point. I don't have that data. But it's something to be mindful of moving forward. So again, just wanted to show this reminder that we're talking across the U.S. in this policy. How many coal miners are we talking in the U.S.? Roughly about 50 to 60,000. So these mining jobs are, my brother would be considered in this mining industry, even though he not actually have a shovel in his hand. But this is a small field we have a large economic policy to support basically 50,000 workers. Just to give you a sense, the solar, I think, is double. The number of people working in the solar industry is double what the coal is. You might have checked the numbers exactly, but it's definitely much higher than theirs for coal. So where are we in regards to coal development in Northern Cheyenne region today? It's just round 3 of this kind of approach. So in 2011, 2010, there was a push to establish a series of coal trains to serve China and the eastern markets. And so this would involve driving coal to different ports in Oregon and Washington. That involved going across Yakima Nation It would involve the Lummi Nation up in the northern part of Washington State. It would involve the Hoh tribe in Washington and the Coos area in Oregon. So again, this was a big push and vision of how to do this. And more specifically, down to Montana, was this Otter Creek mine related to the Northern Cheyenne. So it was just off the reservation, a tributary into the Tongue River. You can see on the vision on the right, you can see where it's proportionally. And there would be a new railroad along from the Otter Creek up to Miles City to an existing train track that would then lead it to Washington and Oregon. That was the proposal this company put forward, and the fight happened basically around that. A group of young Cheyennes and elders helped form an Eco-Cheyenne group to fight. This is an ongoing challenge around this that involves regional efforts and some global implications. So in March, like 1 week after that article came out, the coal company that was proposed the Otter Creek mine actually decided to drop this development plan. And so this is a victory page from the Eco-Cheyenne group. Is that the end of this? That's what we're going to talk a little bit more about moving forward. I should just point out the ARC Coal Company filed for bankruptcy about a month later after this March 10th decision. And just before, the day before or 3 days before they filed for bankruptcy, they gave out $8 million in bonuses to the 12 executives. So I mean, you can kind of do that's some sketchy ethical behavior for what it's worth. Round 4 is kind of what's ongoing with the last election. Is Trump has ended the administration freeze that Obama had set out for offering coal leases. So this is part of his effort that he actively pushed for during the campaign. What this impact remains to be seen. The reaction to this from the Northern Cheyenne has been quick, which was they plan, I don't know that they have filed yet, but they have planned to file a lawsuit if this actually starts getting implemented into coal leases. So there's an ongoing challenge facing the Northern Cheyenne. So this isn't completely free of, there's not a resolution at this point. We are, across the country, we are in desperate need of more native scientists, more environmental scientists. We have engineers, we have lawyers. We can always use more of those, obviously, because this story I've been telling has been mostly the law side of things. Is there a better way to engineeringly develop some of these processes? But we also need some just great biologists with native backgrounds that are going to work back in their communities to manage biodiversity, understand what the impact of these things. For a lot of tribes, we don't really even know fully what plants and animals are there, like in detail. Are these populations increasing, declining, that kind of level? We know it's there because these are plants and animals and stones and things that we have relationships with. But how are they doing in the big picture requires some biology surveys and things like that before you can actually then start manipulating the environment with the development plan of different resources so you can track potential changes.